I'm John Kennedy. I'm on the board of directors for the North Carolina chapter of NORML, and we have been going through a series of public education campaigns to try to get the word out that marijuana really is medicine, and that it really is beneficial to your bodies, and that we're not just a bunch of deadbeat potheads. And but being in the South, we have a long way to go. So making sure aware that there was a medical marijuana bill that was killed.
You were just too insistent, apparently.
Right. Yeah, we're too effective, so we need to re-strategize. But at any rate, so we're going to be going through just a series of guest speakers and events to try to get the word out that NORML exists in North Carolina, that there really is a group of people who want to be involved with the reform movement. And luckily, very lucky, it's almost like April is sweeps month for the marijuana industry. So this is a busy month for us. So we got very lucky that Clint is from North Carolina and is coming to visit his family in the Sacramento night in Charlotte, and has dedicated the entire day to just spread the gospel here in Charlotte. So I don't know how many of you have actually read the book, but there are piles of endorsements here from people that are well respected in this community. I'll read Keith Straup's quote. He's the founder of NORML. Keith says, "This book is a must-read for anyone who wishes to know the science and politics behind the medical marijuana movement. When you hear a claim that sounds unbelievable, this is a great source to separate fact from fiction." And I know I'm guilty of saying things that I haven't completely researched. And so now this book is my Bible as far as trying to make sure that everything is fact-checked. So having said that, I'll let Clint speak about all the science of marijuana and why we should all be ingesting it regularly. So, Clint Werner.
Thank you, John. It's really quite an amazing thing to be back in my home state, because I was born here and I grew up here. I've been in California for 25 plus years. And it's just nice to come back and maybe help change things a little bit, maybe get you guys to have some equipment to bring to the argument, to change the debate a little bit, because there's no way that I just don't see any way that we can't win public opinion over on our side with this, given what science is saying about marijuana and what the enormous body of data that continues to flow in tells us. And I'll just start by talking a little bit about the foundation of the science and how we got to where we are today very quickly. As you probably know, cannabis marijuana was used for many years in India, and it spread sort of through the equatorial regions of the earth, Africa, and to South America. And it was a valued medicinal plant, also a recreational euphoric plant that people just used in the same way many people use alcohol, but also for some really powerful medical effects that nothing else seemed to work appropriately for. And so that started, India was sort of the heart of this, where it really got a hold and where they really developed it into a cultural norm. There's bong that they used to drink, and probably many still do. It's a sort of low potency drink made from cannabis leaves. And then they have charas, and it just was an integral part. And once the British colonists saw how the Indians used marijuana, they started, W.B. O'Shaughnessy, a really brilliant fellow, started to investigate this and saw that yes, this is a powerful medicine that can do a lot of good. So it emerged in Europe after he did a few papers, and they started to import cannabis flowers into Europe and make tinctures and other medicines out of it. Hop the Atlantic over to the United States. Was an effective medicine for pain, cramping, insomnia, all sorts of things that it's being used for these days. And then then came prohibition, and it eradicated medical marijuana, medical cannabis, cannabis that people of Mexican and African extraction used for pleasure and to enhance their love of music and their ability to make music. So that was all crushed. And it just really began to re-emerge into the mainstream in the 60s with the college generation, as college students started to embrace marijuana and smoke it. A lot of this was from Allen Ginsberg's work. He sort of was the bridge between the underground and the subculture of the jazz world and the mainstream white middle class. So it rose in popularity, and about the same time this was happening in the early 60s, an Israeli investigator decided to look at the plant because no one had isolated the active compounds that cause this euphoria in these medical experiences. And he did so. He isolated THC and CBD, and for many years not a lot happened with that because they didn't know how these molecules produce the effects they produce. And that changed in 1988 when a woman, Alan Howlett, who actually is at Wake Forest now, as I'm not sure, I'm pretty sure she's still there, a researcher in residence at Wake Forest. So she found the first cannabinoid receptor in a rat. She labeled a cannabinoid with a radioactive element and then followed it and found it docked in the rat's brain. So this told us how cannabinoids affect their changes in human biology and consciousness. And so once they had this receptor, they began to map the receptors throughout the brain, and soon found out there was also another set of receptors that are expressed not so much in the central nervous system, but mostly in lymph tissue and organ tissue. And this was the Cv2 receptor. The first was Cv1, and then there was Cv2. And from that point, which was in the mid-90s, which was exactly the time the medical marijuana movement was really rising up and saying, enough is enough. We want this for our friends who have AIDS, we want it for our friends who have cancer, and we want it for our friends who suffer from other serious illnesses or other bothersome illnesses. And that really began where I live now in San Francisco. So the science was coming along and the activism was coming along. But once that science was done, that foundation was laid of understanding that we have these receptors expressed throughout our bodies. They began to look, researchers began to look at what these receptors do when the cannabinoids work on them. And this is where it got amazing, because we know it produces anti-nausea effects, and it produces euphoric, mood-elevating effects. But when they really started to look at it, it became unbelievable. And part of this was serendipitous. There's a research group who was doing this work, and they were looking at what THC does on brain metabolism. And astrocytes were the cells they were using, but to use astrocyte brain cells, it's very expensive because they have to be harvested from rats, and you have to buy them. Whereas if you get a line of cancerous brain cells, they reproduce very quickly, and you can establish your own line and have a constant supply instead of constantly having to reorder. So, and it's much more cost effective. So they got this line of brain cancer cells to research brain metabolism with THC. But every time they tried to do an experiment, the brain cells, the cancer cells died off. They would add the THC, and they couldn't do any experiments on metabolism because all the cancer cells died off. So this was Manuel Guzman and Cristina Velasquez in Madrid and their group of researchers. And so they just shifted, of course. I mean, why wouldn't you? Something kills cancer cells. You know, this is a miracle. So they shifted their research into looking at this specifically. And they began to look at it. And what they have discovered in other sites around the world that have picked up this research is that THC has an amazing ability to go in to these receptors, and it The receptors sort of span between membranes and relay information into cells and out of cells. And so they target these receptors and change the signals that are being sent through cells. So that when you have a cancer cell that has an overproduction of chemicals like VEGF, which is needed to produce blood vessels so that the tumors can branch out and parasitize the host, the patient, THC changes the signaling on this so that the VEGF levels drop and the tumors cannot produce these spikes that become parasitizing blood vessels. THC also has this amazing ability to change the survival signaling pathway, the signals that are sent through this pathway, so that pro-cancerous chemicals drop and another chemical, ceramide, rises and floods the cells, selectively the cancer cells. It doesn't do this with the normal cells. And what the ceramide level does is it causes the cell membrane to collapse, to sort of dissolve, collapse in upon itself, and the cells die off, which is known as apoptosis. That's the problem with cancer cells, is they don't have a normal life and death cycle. They live on and reproduce too quickly abnormally. So THC goes in, triggers these changes in the signaling network, which alters the cell chemistry, which kills off the cancer cells. This is big news. And it doesn't harm, this is the dream of cancer research, and it spares the healthy cells and actually nourishes their vitality and health. And what's also amazing is that when they take a cannabinoid receptor blocker and administer it, they still see effects from THC that on a whole different level attack the cells and attenuate its ability to survive. So you have these molecules. THC is the most common one that's really been bred into cannabis. But now in California and other states that have medical laws where there's some freedom to experiment with it, people have become aware of this other molecule, CBD, which is non-psychoactive, and it's sort of like a partner of THC. You know, one is sort of like a wilder, more raucous twin, and one is a more reserved, bookish twin. But what's really amazing about CBD is it does not connect with these receptors. But it, and the more, and we were just beginning to learn about it, but the more we learn about it, the more we understand that it is almost like an overseeing regulator of biology in the body, and it works in harmony with THC. But what we see is that CBD affects the way other chemicals in our bodies respond through other receptors, and affects the activity of receptors called amyloid receptors and then adenosine receptors, and changes the chemical activity of those and adjusts these activities to enhance our vitality and our life and our sense of wellness. And so this is what's really interesting. Here we stand at this threshold. We've gone through the 90s and the early 2000s, the first decade, and we've had the push for medical marijuana. But now the science is coming in, and when we look at what happens with people who use marijuana for pleasure, sociably, what some people call recreationally, the benefits are amazing. It's truly amazing what this plant can do for people who just enjoy it on a regular basis. So what we've seen is that with a large population study intended to find out once and for all, to finally close the case that marijuana causes lung cancer, instead we find not only does marijuana not cause lung cancer, it actually lowers our risk of developing lung cancer by up to 37% compared to non-smokers. This was a study done by Donald Tashkin out of UCLA. Their large population study done for NIDA, National Institute on Drug Abuse, who's raising the ETRAs to produce data to justify the war on drugs. And so this was not, a friendly study, but instead it turned out to show that there's a protective effect against lung cancer. A study in head and neck cancer, I believe the lead researcher was Liang, and they found that cannabis use attenuates head and neck cancer by up to 63%. 63% reduction in head and neck cancer incidence among chronic long-term marijuana smokers. Steve Sidney did a very large population study out of Kaiser in California and found that chronic long-term marijuana smokers have a significant decrease in the incidence of lymphomas. So this just keeps continuing and continuing to come in. And last year, there was a very large, there's this In-Hanes study, which is a national survey that produces a lot of information about what disease processes manifest in society and health in general. And this study found there's over 10,000 subjects. Chronic long-term marijuana smokers have a significant reduction in the incidence of diabetes compared to people who do not use marijuana. Significant reduction, which is also in harmony with other findings that show that chronic marijuana smokers have a dose-dependent decrease in obesity. So this is, really amazing that these syndromes that are causing so much trouble in terms of national health care costs can be lowered profoundly by THC and CBD. And when we look at the cause of this, the mechanism underlying this, it's very similar to that offers the tumor protection, the anti-cancer activity. What we find is that what's at the base of all of these diseases that seem to cause the worst misery in our society is chronic abnormal inflammation, also abnormal oxidation, and immune dysfunction. And the really impressive, amazing thing is that THC, CBD, marijuana has activity against all of those, all three of those activities, so that you get a reduction in the compounds that lead to inflammation, cytokines and nitric oxide, and you get an elevation of compounds that neutralize and fight inflammation. So you see cancer, diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, other forms of illness. And what may be really, possibly most promising of all is Alzheimer's disease, because to me, that is the most frightening illness of all, because you live on, but your mind dies, and you're in a vegetative state for a period of disorienting behavior, fearful, just really sad activity of not knowing where you are or what's going on. You lose reference points to who your loved ones were, what your daily routine is, and it's frightening, and the patients can become hostile and even violent. So there's a researcher out of Ohio, Gary Wink, and he started researching the effect of cannabinoids on human brain health. And he said, we see some evidence that it works against the process that leads to Alzheimer's. Marijuana seems to, these cannabinoids. So we said, well, could you use those to help Alzheimer's? And he was very conservative. He said, no, we don't want to say that. We can't think about that. We don't want to go there. Did some more research. And he said, well, if you have a family history of Alzheimer's, it might be possible that you could smoke marijuana and avoid it or delay it. And he did more research. Now he's just given up trying to pretend that, trying to appease the opponents. He's given that up. He says, it's never too late to start smoking marijuana. He says, he told his medical students, if they have a patient who has had a severe head injury due to an automobile accident, the first thing they should be told is to start smoking marijuana heavily for 3 weeks, because it reverses the chemical damage this chain reaction of damage that follows and production of harmful chemicals. And it also triggers the production of healthy functional new brain cells called neurogenesis. Now think about that. For years we were told marijuana kills brain cells. Marijuana destroys the brain. I think Reagan said something like, it's as harmful to the brain as being within a mile of a nuclear bomb blast, or something nonsensical like that. And in fact, we find that just the opposite is true. That it nurtures the health of the brain, that it reduces inflammation, fights oxidation, and triggers the production of healthy new brain cells. And this may sound a little weird, but you know, I'm in the health food world, and sometimes things we think we know often reverse themselves when we find evidence, because in the 80s in the health food world, chocolate was a huge villain. Chocolate was really bad for you. You don't eat chocolate. There was a whole industry. You don't see it anymore. It was called carob. Carob milk balls, carob peanuts, carob raisins, carob this, carob that, because chocolate was the villain. It wasn't the chocolate. When we looked at the compounds in chocolate, they have some of the same activities that cannabis has. Neuroprotection and neurogenesis triggering activity. So you see some of that. It was the sugar. Sugar is really poisonous, inflammatory, sort of anti-cannabis in a way, ironically enough. But when you take the chocolate out of the sugar, it's good. And the same thing is proven true with marijuana. We've been told it's bad, it's bad, it's bad. We look at the science, and the science says, no, it's not bad. Actually, it has a number of properties that nurture and improve human health. So, we've seen that the compounds in cannabis, marijuana, have the ability to protect us from diabetes, Alzheimer's, a variety of cancers, and probably pretty much all cancers, because there's a similar, not exact, but there is a similar biochemistry to these cancers, most of them, and it's unlikely that it won't work for colon cancer, breast cancer, and other forms of cancer. So we're also looking at what CBD does, and in terms of cancer, this is really remarkable, the research that's been done in California, UCSF. Sean McAllister found that the molecule CBD actually changes gene expression within cancer and stops metastasis in breast cancer to a remarkable degree, and they're going to start trials with human subjects. Also at UCSF, there's a neurologist who is a brain cancer specialist, and he says that the one thing all of his long-term glioblastoma patients have in common is heavy marijuana use. His long-term survivors. One, because glioblastoma is a terrible cancer and it usually kills within 2 years, 18 months, and you're gone. But his long-term survivors who have been alive several years are all heavy marijuana smokers or users. So there really is a growing body of evidence that you can use marijuana not only as a palliative treatment for vomiting after chemotherapy or for pain, but to actually improve your state of health, to protect yourself from diabetes, Alzheimer's, cancer, and other immunodegenerative illnesses and other illnesses that result from inflammation. So what's going on in California is, since we have this provision, and in other states, it really isn't all about getting high anymore. It's about being well and vital and avoiding illness or treating the early stages of illness or illnesses that are annoying but not terminal. And we have external balms, we have sprays, we have all kinds of ointments and rubs that people are using for fibromyalgia, other sorts of pain, for rheumatism, arthritis pain. We have CBD medicines that do not get you high, that you can use as tinctures or as an oil, concentrated oil, or you can get candies. You can get different levels of THC. You can get capsules. You can get under-the-tongue sprays. And we've really pioneered a whole industry of health and wellness out of cannabis in California. And that's what's driving our opponents crazy, because they continue to want to portray it as something sleazy and degenerate and dangerous for our health. But the science does not support their position. So what they turn to now is this slippery, hard to pin down idea that marijuana causes mental illness or causes insanity. And it's the same story as reefer madness. I mean, it was more exaggerated then, but I had a debate with Kevin Sabat a few days ago, and he is the face of anti-marijuana in this country. And his whole push is that it's so dangerous because THC is so much stronger in marijuana than it was, and it's causing addiction and mental illness. And the thing I kept hammering him with that he would not accept is, you look from the 50s through the 70s, as I pointed out, we went from a Dean Martin culture to a Bob Marley culture. And from the time where almost no one smoked marijuana to the time where an enormous number of people were smoking marijuana, there's been no change in the incidence of mental illness, psychosis, schizophrenia in our culture, in the world culture. It's a constant 1% of the population. And if anything, it's actually decreased a little bit. So they keep pushing this and trying to scare parents into opposing legalization. But I don't think it's going to work, because I saw a study that came out last year, and it was quite remarkable. I have it right here. Does cannabis use lead to schizophrenia? Schizophrenic patients with comorbid cannabis use often show significantly better performances in neuropsychological tests than patients without cannabis use. And there's more evidence of that patients who have psychosis who use cannabis regularly have a longer life expectancy and better functioning on neurocognitive tests. And interestingly enough, the study that showed that also showed, it was a fairly long duration study, also showed that none of the subjects who were using cannabis compared to the controls died of cancer or had strokes, whereas 4 in each group suffered that in the controls, the non-using cannabis population. So in the non-using cannabis controls, there were 4 deaths from cancer, and there were 4 incidences of stroke, and while there were none in the cannabis-using population. That's not a huge statistical result, but it is interesting because we see this play out time and time again. So this idea of mental illness is not well-founded, and if you really look at the data, what you find is that people who have a likelihood of developing psychosis tend to gravitate to marijuana because it lowers the symptoms that bother them, and sometimes they have problems dosing themselves adequately, which can then aggravate the onset of the symptoms of psychosis because they might be using too much or inappropriately, whereas others do very well with it. But if you look at who that is, that's such a small percentage of 1% of the population. First of all, it's not causative, and it's not really affecting that 1%. It's not raising it up. Within that 1%, it doesn't register the value of anyone who's affected by cannabis. Whereas you look at the incidence of cancer in our society, 33% of the population is at risk for cancer. And then you add in Alzheimer's, they call it the wave of dementia that's coming. This is going to be a huge expense for public health care and a nightmare for people and their families and our culture in general. The loss of people early, their cognition to this disease is terrible. And then you add in diabetes. If you can significantly lower the incidence of diabetes in this culture, you're going to save an enormous amount, because then you're affecting stroke, heart disease, amputations, nerve damage. The largest cause of blindness in the United States is diabetic retinopathy, blindness from diabetes. So we can just really attenuate all these, and that's not what the opposition wants to hear. When I kept trying to make these points, he kept interrupting me. So then I just started interrupting him when he was making his points and asking him the hard questions. But the real question that a lot of people are going to want to know, whether it does turn out, if a 12-year-old smokes marijuana heavily, that it might lower their IQ. If that turns out to be true, how do we keep marijuana away from young people? There are young people who shouldn't be using it, and I don't think we're doing a good job now. I think if we have, like we have here, ABC stores in North Carolina, if we have dedicated vending sites and locations where you know your cannabis is grown by people who aren't using toxins on it, it's not adulterated with talcum powder or glass or whatever else they put in to weigh down the weed, and you get a safe product, and it's controlled, the gangs who produce it are going to disappear. Kevin Sabat said, no, they'll just redirect this and that. And I said, Kevin, the gangs are not growing tobacco in our national forests. You know, it's just not happening. And kids aren't running around drinking hooch from the moonshine because it's controlled. And that's another point we need to make is if you have kids who do get hold of marijuana, you'd rather it be diverted from safe, clean marijuana from an established vending site than from a Mexican gang that has raised it using pesticides that were intended for decorative plants that are not meant for human consumption, because they don't care what they put on this stuff. If it keeps the bugs off and gets it into harvest to make profit, they're going to do it. And these organic chlorophosphate insecticides actually do cause brain damage, interrupt the functioning of the endocannabinoid receptor system in the brain, and cause other receptors to degenerate so that they contribute to Parkinson's and Alzheimer's disease. So, you know, this whole effort of continuing maintaining prohibition is so counterproductive if you're really talking about human health in our society. So what you do is you control it, make sure it's safe, it comes from good, established farmers who appreciate what the plant is and they raise it properly, and you take it out of the streets. You get rid of the gangs, you get rid of the toxic weed. And then the main thing, the point I make though, is the only way to really make sure kids don't get into drugs is for parents to be involved in their lives every day, to make sure you know who their friends are, where they're going, what they're doing. You don't let them go out and hang out in a park. You have dinner with them and you monitor their behavior, because that's what keeps kids off drugs and alcohol, which is a worse drug than marijuana. So that's the point our opponents are trying to grab hold of and salvage prohibition with. And we just need to let it be known to the parents who are fearful that legalization is only going to make things better and protect their children. And another citation I should give you all, and then maybe I'll take some questions, is there's a recent study, and this was a fun thing in the debate because there was a study done, a survey of all the data in terms of traffic accident deaths in the United States, and looking at medical marijuana states, how they compare to non-medical marijuana states in terms of traffic accident fatalities. And the researchers did a really fairly elegant survey of this and found that in the medical marijuana states, since medical marijuana laws took effect, there is overall a 9% reduction in traffic accident fatalities. That's massive. That's the level that was used to justify mandatory seatbelt laws, 9%, and raising the drinking age from 18 to 21. Those are pretty much right in that range, the same values that were used to justify those changes. And so you see this drop because of the displacement of alcohol consumption. But also interesting is even in the non-alcohol consuming population, there was still a slight decrease in traffic accident deaths since the passage of medical marijuana laws. And I think that that plays off the fact that cannabinoids actually nurture our sense of balance and coordination. A study was done where they blocked off cannabinoid receptors, and they found out that the subjects who had their receptor activity blocked had a significant increase in automobile accidents, contusions, falls, concussions, whiplash, these sort of klutzy accidents, because their body wasn't in harmony. So, back to Colorado. They did this study. It was released as a working paper, as sometimes researchers will put out data early. And I saw that SAM dismissed it on their website. It's a working paper, and it is spurious. It makes a spurious association between alcohol use and medical marijuana and the decrease in traffic accident deaths. So I thought that was just, too much. If you know anything about academic research, you know it's not A to B. It progresses. Sometimes things are presented as posters at conferences, released as working papers. So I thought it was so disingenuous of them to play off, the ignorance of the general public about that and say it's a working paper, it's not peer-reviewed. That was their big claim, it's not peer-reviewed. So I emailed the lead researcher a few days before the debate, and I said, hey, they're saying your work isn't peer-reviewed, it looks like a great study to me, what's the status? Well, our paper's through the review process and will soon be published in the most respected journal in law and economics in the country. So the Journal of Law and Economics. And so I baited Kevin Sabbath into that because I knew how they were dismissing it. And so I brought it out and I said, and what we see is a significant protective effect by displacing alcohol in medical marijuana states, and you have that's a working paper. I said, well, beg your pardon? It's a working paper. I said, but it's got serious, it's not peer reviewed, it's a working paper, and it's been discredited. I said, what? He said, it's been discredited. I said, really, Kevin? Because I have a letter here from the lead researcher that just came to me the other day. I'm sure you have a letter, and I'm sure he's very proud of his research. I said, Kevin, do you mind if I read this one? It's kind of like Paul Lind a little bit, if you know. Some people won't remember who he is. So I read it, what I told you, and he just, began to sweat on his forehead, and anyway, we had a really heated time because he kept interrupting me, and then I kept talking over him. But the point is that these people, I really think the group he's tied up with have a vested fiscal interest in keeping marijuana illegal, because there's a group of people who make a living off having people funneled into drug treatment by law enforcement who would never have to go, want to go, or need to go. If you're caught smoking a joint somewhere and you're arrested and you're taken to court and you have a bag of pot or whatever, and they give you a choice, you're going to do some time in jail, or we can put you in treatment. And you go to treatment, and you have to sign something that says, I'm a marijuana addict. And so it gives them data to use to say, we have a big marijuana addiction problem, to further their funding of law enforcement and drug treatment programs, which is sort of this weird incestuous cycle. So that's where they're coming from. That's the last best thing they have. And also concerns that there's going to be a big marijuana industry like big tobacco, and it's going to target kids. And he was rattling off, Sabbath was rattling off about the tobacco industry targeting kids, and I made the point, we got rid of Joe Camel. We can handle these things, It's not out of the realm of possibility. We're smart people. But he wouldn't have any of it. He could not acknowledge the possibility that there could be a culture in which pleasurable, enhancing use of marijuana has been accepted and integrated as a natural part of life. And I think that's what we're going to see, because it's too expensive to keep ruining lives. And once people learn that even if they don't want to get high, they can have just a little bit of marijuana every night, a little puff or some tincture or capsule, and protect themselves from these illnesses from which there's no equally effective protection. So So I think that's where we stand now, and if we all go out there and take these studies and educate people on a regular basis about how this is happening and show them the evidence, we're going to win. And if you can, what I do in California, I mean, it's so much harder for you here, but I'm in, you know, the dog world, dog shows, dog sporting. I love to be among dogs, and a lot of dog people are sort of conservative, rural people from out in the Sacramento Valley. Wonderful people, but they're not like, you know, hip urban stoners by any means. And I take topical balms because a lot of them have arthritis or pain syndromes. And I give them these topical sprays and balms. And yes, I'm giving them cannabis without an approval. But what the hell? They can't get high off it. There's no way they can, and it's helping them. And it wins them over to our side. I'll give you one quick anecdote, and then I'll take some questions. My dear, dear friend, who she's up in Oregon, and we're into dogs, and she has a friend who's into dogs up there, who's a veteran who came back from war with a crushed pelvis that has caused systemic nerve pain, bad inflammatory nerve pain, and she's been miserable. She's a drug and alcohol counselor. She was having none of medical marijuana because that's the world she's in. But I gave her a remedy, and I want to make clear, bath salts, not the kind that make people go crazy in Florida and cannibalize vagrants' faces. These are bath salts, bath soap that is impregnated with an extract from the cannabis plant. And so I gave her some through my friend, and she started using them, and she swears by them now. She said she's never had such pain relief as she's had from these bath salts. Then I got a call from them about 2 weeks ago, and my friend Lindy's laughing. She says, "We're here sitting ringside at the dog show in Albany, eating marijuana cookies." And I said, "What?" And she said, and I'm going to change the name, she said, "Yeah, Janice is here, and she's found out that if she eats some of these cookies, it even helps her pain more." And then I looked on her Facebook page, and she had posted, "I've learned that I need to be more open-minded about things that might help me." Then I saw she put up one of these memes, you know, a Facebook meme, a little poster of Ali G. Do you all know Ali G? You gotta find out about Ali. Ali G's the one. So Ali G is this hipster dude from, you know, Great Britain, and he does these interviews with people and he baits them into saying crazy stuff. But he had this saying, he was interviewing a DEA agent, and he said, "Why is weed illegal and Pringles is legal? Even they admits when you pop, you can't stop." So she had this up on her Facebook page, and I'm like, it's over. When you get someone who is a drug and alcohol counselor, whose perspective has changed, and she's going to tell people, and they're going to try. The genie is so far out of the bottle that Sam and the DEA and NIDA will never, ever be able to put it back. Hey, hello. That's people just came.
Yeah, a little late.
So, hey, I'll just tell you, since you're in late, we're talking about how cannabis produces compounds that mimic the compounds we make in our body, endocannabinoids, and the plant cannabinoids match up really effectively with the activity to heighten and amplify the activity. The activity of these compounds is to reduce inflammation in the body, to protect us from abnormal oxidative damage, and to modulate our immune function so that we don't turn on ourselves and give ourselves diabetes or other degenerative illnesses. So, and it's just amazing that the data comes out and it shows that even people who are smoking, even though smoking is not a helpful way to ingest cannabis because you get harmful gases and particulate matter, still have a reduction in lung cancer, head and neck cancer, lymphoma, and a significant protection from Alzheimer's disease, And now the most recent study shows chronic long-term marijuana smokers have significant protection from diabetes. So, and now I was just about to take some questions. Anything else since you're late, I'll let you. You want to start out? Get you caught up? It's a hard place to find.
Yeah, well, I come from Myrtle Beach. And,
Oh, wow.
yeah.
Party naked.
What's that?
The gay dolphin, I don't know if they still do. They used to have these mugs that say party naked.
Yeah. Not sure.
Before it's time.
What carcinogens does it have from smoking?
Okay, yeah, so that's interesting because when you combust marijuana and smoke it, you get a really similar profile as you do with tobacco. You get these benzopyrene gases, and you get the particulate matter, the little ash, and you get carbon monoxide and other nasty compounds. So you do get those when you smoke. The fascinating thing is you still get protection from lung cancer because the cannabinoids are so powerful in their anti-tumor activity and their anti-inflammatory activity that when the changes start in the cells, the THC does a circuit breaker on them. It stops that signaling and interrupts it. So you can see precancerous signs in heavy marijuana smokers and some of the upper airway tissue, but it stops. It never progresses into lung cancer. I won't say never because, some people do get it, but it's very unlikely to have a significant reduction. And I would just say with the brain cancer, when they treated brain cancer in patients who were very, very advanced with recurrence, they found 1/3 had the tumors went into regression, 1/3 the tumors stopped growing, and then 1/3 had no effect. So sometimes I kind of cringe when people say cannabis cures cancer because there's not a lot. I mean, it's the type of overstatement that kind of alienates the medical professionals we need to reach. And because they hear cure and it sounds like whack. So I always say, is a possible effective treatment for which there's a growing body of evidence. Do you want to, anyone?
Yeah, as far as cancer treatment is concerned, you had mentioned in your C-SPAN talk that it's possible to flood your system or to saturate your system with, I guess, what they call hemp oil, and that can have a treating effect. Can you talk a little bit about, I guess, what kind of oil it is that people would use and how the dosing would work?
Yeah, that's
what the effects are.
A big area of interest now. It's all over Facebook and the internet. So oil. So there's hemp seed oil you can get at Whole Foods probably, and that's just squeezed out of the seeds. But what's sometimes called hemp oil, I call it cannabis oil. It is taking a whole lot of marijuana, really good marijuana, and breaking it down away, taking it, extracting the oils and the components out of the cellulose and the vegetative matter, and concentrating it down so that you take a pound of marijuana and get like 12 grams, or I forget exactly what the ratio is, depending on the source material, of this concentrated cannabis oil that's so high in THC, 50+% THC, and then if you use the plants that have CBD, you can get a nice THC-CBD ratio or a high CBD. And what's going on is people are using it. They've looked at the science. There's this one guy, Rick Simpson. He's a Canadian, and he got the idea. Many of us had the idea. I was wondering with all this data about anti-tumor activity, what if you just vaporize all day? Like you vaporize constantly, and you eat, baked goods, and you just flood your system. What would happen? But he did come up with the idea of really making it possible to saturate the system with this oil because it's so concentrated that you can take it and just really hit those receptors and just, flood it and increase that anti-tumor activity. And a lot of these tumors express more receptors on their surface than normal cells. So it's like it's sort of looking for correction. And then you hit those receptors and they start dying off. And there's been really good evidence coming up about it, pretty impressive. I'll just tell you my own experience. I was kind of dubious, but they talked about skin cancer. But I have psoriasis, that's a genetic illness that makes you have sort of itchy, reddening, disfiguring plaque, skin plaque. And the best remedy is sunshine. But so with psoriasis, it's an inflammatory disease, and I have to get sunshine. I have to go out there's chemicals I can use, but they damage the skin, so the best thing for me is sunshine. That puts me at risk for basal cell and other skin cancers. I've had 2 basal cells taken from my face and 1 from my back, but would you rather be disfigured or deal with that later on? So I deal with that. But I had a lesion, I can't remember where it was now, right here, that had bothered me, a precancerous lesion. For about 8 years, I'd had it frozen off 3 times by my dermatologist, and it hadn't gone away. And it was a little painful if I touched it or if I smiled a certain way. And someone said, oh, use some of this oil in it. So I put it on. I said, what the hell? I don't believe that this is really going to make a difference, but there's evidence, so maybe it will. I put it on. Within 6 days, it was gone. It had completely disappeared. No trace of it. And I was just totally blown away about that. So on that sense, I'm a believer, and people are using it in that way. The problem is it's very hard for people because it's not just getting high. You get wrecked. You get serious, high to the point at which you feel very bad. I mean, it's an overwhelming. So what they do is they gradually move people up so they build a tolerance. But some people can't deal with it. It's too much for them. So hopefully we'll be able to see more CBD come in that will take down some of this bothersome effect of THC for some people. But I have a friend, and I want to suggest everyone goes to the website regularly, beyondthc, it was .com, beyondthc.com. It's O'Shaughnessy's newsletter that's gone online now, and they have a story about Michelle Aldrich, who is a friend of mine, and she's been in the cannabis movement for years and years and years. She got the Lifetime Achievement Award with her husband Mike from High Times a couple of years ago. And actually it was NORML, sorry. She was diagnosed with stage 3 lung cancer. It has her whole story. She did chemotherapy, but she changed her diet and she started taking 1 gram of cannabis oil a day. And she's cancer-free. She had her 3rd scan last week and called me, and there's no trace of lung cancer. The chemotherapy, she did, I don't even think she did a full cycle. She did a few cycles, a few doses. But it's not known for eradicating lung cancer. It just slows the growth and buys time. And she's cancer-free, and her doctor really believes it's the effect of the cannabinoids, THC, on the receptors, killing off the tumor cells. There's a woman, Corey Elland, up in Canada. I'm not sure she's in BC or where she is, Ontario, but she had, I believe colorectal or anal cancer, and she's cancer-free. And there are more and more people who are putting their pathology reports up on Facebook and on the internet who are having their tumors shrink down. And it's just amazing. And yet there are people who want to keep this from us and continue throwing people into jail or forcing them into treatment. That was one thing I got Kevin. I kind of got him in a corner. I said, so how does this work? How does this work with you? Someone's smoking a joint before they go in to see the latest 3D movie and they get arrested. Well, they wouldn't necessarily get arrested. Well, what happens? How do they go to your treatment you're going to force them into? Well, they might not necessarily go into treatment. I said, well, what are you talking about? He said, well, they might need a life review. And I said, excuse me? This guy's going to get he's smoking a joint? Well, he could be homeless, he might be jobless. I said, he's writing code in Silicon Valley, okay? He doesn't need a life review. And I said, totalitarianism. Now, who are these people to tell us, because we enjoy cannabis, which is less harmful, more beneficial than alcohol, liquor, beer, that we can't have it. In fact, a recent report came out and said there's no safe level of alcohol ingestion with regard to cancer. There is none. With cannabis, it's the opposite. The more you ingest, the less likely you are to invite cancer into your life. So, you know, it's really crazy the state we find ourselves in. And I just maintain when they say that we can't afford the health care costs of another illegal, abusable substance, we have to say, no, you don't understand. We're talking about lower diabetes, lower Alzheimer's, lower cancer rates. This is going to help society. Not to mention lower traffic accident deaths. And there was a decrease in suicides, a significant lowering of suicides. I think it was, the highest rate was 12% in men between like 24 and 32, something like that. I'm not exact on that, in states with medical marijuana laws, which also speaks to the objection people have about young men going in to get medical marijuana approvals who don't have cancer or AIDS or glaucoma. Well, you know what? Getting arrested for marijuana is a seriously altering life experience that induces so much stress into your life. Stress is a precursor to inflammation, which is a precursor to cancer and every other degenerative illness. So getting arrested is a health threat, and these young men are using it as a shield against serious health threats from being arrested. And they're also apparently doing something to help their mental health, because there's a lowering of suicides in that population.
Down all over the place.
It doesn't exist for any other substance other than marijuana. You have to get this, you know, NIH approval and NIDA approval. And so that's not going to affect that, but there will be data coming out like the suicide. I look forward to seeing, you know, what happens with traffic accidents now that it's legal and more people can access it, and see if we see even lower rates of traffic accident deaths. That would be amazing. And so you're going to see some of those, but you're also going to see some scare studies come out, because there are going to be people who are well funded by the government to do slanted research that has an aim to try and find some value that may be aberrant in the overall body of data. Then they'll take this one little aberrant value, and then they'll call it a conclusion and put out a press release about it. That's what happened with the testicular cancer. Do you remember that study that came out last year? It was all over. Marijuana causes testicular cancer. It's proven. It's decided once and for all. No, it's not. If you look at, and they're too scientifically illiterate in the media to even go and look at the damn study and see what it says. It said that men who used marijuana regularly who stopped were at an increased risk for testicular cancer, whereas the ones who used it consistently and most heavily showed a slight decrease in the incidence of testicular cancer. So they take this one value out of the context of the whole and inflate it as a horror story. And they know, you know, what's going to get young men who are frequent users of marijuana really scared of marijuana. You know, you'd have to be nuts to believe that study.
And you talked earlier about using dogs. I'm a dog lover myself. My wife's a veterinary assistant. So when you said they can't get high, was that because of what you were using, or can canines truly not get high the way humans do?
Oh, did I?
I think you said they don't get high.
I don't know. Was I talking? I don't know. I talked about using I mean, my friend
The
who's
ointments on their knees for arthritis.
Oh, that was for people who are in the dog
Oh,
world.
for people, not the dog.
But you know, you bring up a good point, because there's a company called it's out Hercules Health Center. It's a dispensary in Northern California, and they're making They made a cannabis-infused mud clay that people use for horses on their hocks after they've been riding to a show or competition or been in it, and they get sore hocks, and they put this clay on it. And this guy gave it to his friend's son who has juvenile arthritis and walked with a cane, and he started using this clay, and now he doesn't use a cane anymore. And there's a remedy for dogs if they get hot spots that's infused with cannabis. My dog was getting a little red spot. One of them had a little, biting the tail, right where the tail joins the butt, and they sometimes get that red hot spot starting. And I sprayed it with this, and in 10 minutes the redness was gone. And so, but no, you don't get high using it topically. It just works on it doesn't go into the bloodstream.
And I had read, it was a while back, in 2008 or 2009, how a company was looking to market a pain-relieving cannabis-based patch for dogs. I don't know where that went, if anywhere, but it's obvious that all mammals have the endocannabinoid system, but since the research is so limited on humans, it's going to be even further limited on animals. I would think, or at least that would probably take a backseat to human research.
Yeah, I think there's actually a veterinarian I'm going to interview when I go home. The guy from Hercules has been telling me about him. He's starting to look at this and see what happens with dogs. And there are actually people who are giving their dogs oil and having the tumors shrink. I've seen some reports of that on Facebook. And I know that, I think it was Mike Booten, who's on this Weed World. I think he had a dog that had a gum tumor, and he was putting it on there, and the vet was impressed because it wasn't advancing or shrinking. I mean, this is real. I mean, this is not, like I said, I told Kevin he was objecting and kept interrupting when I was trying to present this data because he didn't want me to make these points. That this is solid science. It's done, and it's by prestigious researchers at academic institutions, and it's published in prestigious, respected, peer-reviewed studies in medical journals. And I told him this is not research that was done at the Spicoli Institute for Higher Learning. This is solid stuff, and it's not going to turn around. It's bad for them because we know what direction this heads in, and it's not going to turn on a dime and suddenly find that smoking marijuana causes kidney failure or blindness or auditory dysfunction or your liver enzymes to go out of whack and your liver to collapse and consume it. No, only if it has cancer cells in it will that happen, specifically the cancer cells. So, talk to people about this. I have marijuanagatewaytohealth.com. I'm going to be putting more of these abstracts out on it, and I have a lot out already explaining this and documenting it. And in my book, my Facebook page, go to beyondthc.org, check it and see. I'm not sure if they have the paper, but O'Shaughnessy's newspaper is now online, and it's it's amazing what the work, the scholarship. The publisher, editor is a former science editor for Scientific American, Fred Gardner. And Paul Armendano writes for NORML. He's brilliant. He's a friend of mine. If you go to the NORML, National NORML website, he's always also documenting this and putting up stuff. We all work together. We're all going to pitch in and win this because human decency demands it. My mother has Alzheimer's. I'm going to see her. How do I feel coming from California, too scared to bring her something because I don't want to go to prison in North Carolina? I'm scared if, I give her a remedy and she might have something, she has a fall or something, and they do a test and they find she's positive. What's going to happen? Because it's illegal here, and that's just wrong. It's just wrong. Everyone should be able to have access to this beautiful plant that obviously co-evolved with us to produce chemicals that match up with our health building pathways.
Clint, I was wondering if you could comment on some of these nascent East Coast medical marijuana programs that are just really getting up and running, as far as how they compare to what you guys have been doing in California. I guess you started in the mid-90s, right?
Yeah, 96 is when we passed, and within a few years the dispensary started appearing. And once we got rid of Dan Lundgren as our state attorney general, who was an ideologue who hated the whole idea of it and just really tried to crush it, it really started to expand and bloom. And I think, you know, people mock us. They say that they don't want a California model. And I think the California model works great because we have in our law written for any ailment for which it provides relief. And you know what? We didn't know then what we know now. We didn't know about the endocannabinoid system, but we knew the tradition that people had used it in Mexico, where they make poultices out of the leaves for arthritis and pain, and where it's used for all of these different ailments in different ways. So I think it should be as widely available as possible. I don't think kids should use cannabis unless it is for serious medical reasons. I don't think it's helpful for their mental health to be high all the time, as I've said. But, you know, we have restrictions on our dispensaries, and if you're, and like I said before, if your kids are getting cannabis, you'd rather have it come from a safe source than from a Mexican drug game.
As far as, sorry about that. So if I'm interested in just cancer prevention and Alzheimer's, do you have recommendations just based on what you've seen that would be proper prevention as far as dose and THC versus CBD ratios and frequency?
THC will do it alone. THC with CBDs apparently quantifiably, you know, it's just significantly better. It's beyond, it potentiates beyond what you might expect. They just work together really well. But you know, if you can't get CBD yet, you know, this is so hard in North Carolina because I say, oh, you know, grow your own plants and make your tincture. And it's like some SWAT team's gonna come and kick your door, throw in a flash grenade, shoot your pets, trash your belongings, haul you off, and ruin your life because you grow this plant that can improve your health and protect you from serious illness. So it's crazy to me. It makes me very frustrated to not be able to tell you, you know, what to do, because I don't really know what cannabis is like in North Carolina now. When I got it when I was growing up in the 70s, 80s, initially the late 70s when I first tried it, it was Colombian and it was seedy and it was this, you don't know what's in it or whatever. And then we got Sinsemilla that people were growing. I had a friend who grew down near Wilmington, fields of it. And so I don't really know what you're getting, or if it's like indoor and it's like really chemicalized, or
Very abundant and very organic.
oh, it is here?
Yeah.
So in that case, I would get it, and you can get Everclear here still, right? So I get, okay, Purple Jesus, they used to have parties or something. But you can get that and make tincture, or I don't say make oil because you can burn yourself up unless you're really skilled and careful and you study it as a chemist would, and you're very cautious. And don't go taking butane and freaking blow up an apartment complex. It's bad for the movement. Or burn the skin off your hands and face. You know, don't do that. But you can take and soak, grind it up and soak it and make tincture. And you can take drops of that. Or you could make baked goods that are low potency baked goods. Maybe you take it out with coconut oil, extract the cannabinoids with coconut oil, and then make little cookies or something and have those on a regular basis. And Gary Wink says you don't need much for Alzheimer's. One puff a day, one tiny puff a day is enough. A puff is enough. protect you from dementia. That's his motto. They have t-shirts in his lab, "Puff is enough." And, you know, the opponents hate that because they don't think there should be any levity or lighthearted or whimsical treatment of it. But they've never used it. And I'll tell you, marijuana does cause mental illness in people who've never ever tried it. So you had a question?
I watched a documentary called The Union,
Oh yeah, I saw that.
and they said before Prohibition, cannabis was used in like 70% of all pharmaceuticals.
Probably, well, that depends, because if you're in the late 1800s, it was used a lot. In the Civil War, that morphine, it was used a lot. But then when the hypodermic needle was invented and synthetic compounds began to hit the marketplace, it fell out of favor to a degree because it was hard to administer back then. And it was also variable. Because if you grow one patch of cannabis and you get a lot of sun that year and you have really good soil versus a year where it's really cloudy and overcast or something and you don't get the production. So there were varying levels of potency in the remedies. But it was pretty ubiquitous, and it was compounded, with a lot of other drugs because it protects the body against the toxic effects of other drugs. That's one of the big fields of promise for this and that's what I said about the commercial side effects. There's a role for a commercial pharmaceutical cannabis product because doctors are going to want to know. They're going to want to have something if they find out, which there's indications that when you put cannabinoids, THC, CBD with chemotherapeutic agents, that it like makes the cancer cells more vulnerable to the chemotherapy and shields the surrounding cells from the harmful effects of the chemotherapy. And so it's much more effective. So you're not going to want, an oncologist isn't going to say go to a dispensary and get this. He's going to say, here, we have this, drip, and it's a combination of gemcitabine and THC and CBD. And so that's how you're going to need to have that. And for people who have illnesses that are more comfortable with the pharmaceutical model, but we don't need to have that as the only option. Certainly not for prevention or for treating minor ailments or for people who just want to try it themselves to be free. If we can establish like community guilds of producing cannabis oil that's tested and we know it works, why do we have to send our money to Great Britain where they're growing cannabis in a greenhouse? I've been there. And I mean, I'm glad they're doing the work, but I mean, I'm in California and you're here. I'm going to say we grow, it's the Loire Valley of marijuana, Humboldt. It's the best place to grow marijuana in the world. It's incredible the cannabis that comes out of there. North Carolina is damn good too. I grew marijuana here once. So, we don't need to put profits out of the country to some big pharma company. When we can keep it, make jobs at home in our communities, have guilds, have collectives that raise cannabis. We have labs that test it. We have Steep Hill and other analytical labs. So when I go into a dispensary, I know if I want something really strong, I can get it. If I want something really mild, I can get it. I have a friend, and she died of lung cancer. This was before we really thought much about the oil and treating it. But she had done chemo, and it knocked her out. She was miserable, couldn't get out of bed, wasn't eating. And I told her daughter, they had some money. I said, get a Volcano. Actually, I got her one cheap from my friend. I had to get it from cost. And get a Volcano. And I broke state and federal law and mailed her 8% THC marijuana. She was in New York, and I mailed it to her. And her daughter wasn't really keen on it. She was not part of the world, She had misconceptions. She calls me and she says, "Oh my God, Clint. Oh my God, Clint. I can't believe this." She was about to cry. She said, "This is the best thing that's happened since this happened, Mother." She said, I didn't know it would be like this. She's out of bed. She's eating. She's at the table and she's eating and she's chatting and she feels 1,000% better. And she's making plans to go visit her friends 2 towns over, you know, next Sunday. I can't believe this. She's a different person. This has changed her. She said, I thought maybe it would just make her feel a little better, that she'd be kind of a zombie. This has brought her back. And that's what it does. It enhances, you know. So we need to just make my experience where I can go in. Because I knew she didn't need 14% THC.
Right.
You know, there was no purpose in that for her. She wants something just a little bit to get this in her, to balance her out, bring her up.
Are you aware of any other state besides Oregon that allows non-residents to get their medical marijuana card?
I'm not. You know, I'm not that up on all the policies of each place, but I didn't even realize it was the only one. And then I didn't realize that it did, but that's great.
California, you have to be a resident.
Sort of, yeah, you can work around it if you're savvy, but
Yeah. Major Z clubs.
well, I mean, I just got here. I'm relocating, you know. I got a serious illness. I mean, if you know, you should have a serious illness to pull that one, I think, but, or something that's, you know, very much bothers it, not just to get high, because it's gaming the system, but
You got a few 100,000 people out there that are qualified for medical cannabis legally. Is there any effort to address the cost of care as far as cannabis therapeutics, as far as guaranteeing access to people who may not have a lot of money, no insurance?
no, not that I, you know, I mean, it's like, the government comes against us. You can't claim it, you can't use insurance, and they tax it, which they don't do other medicines. So that's, you know, kind of contradictory to what it should be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's just partially it's illegality though on a federal scale. I think it might become endorsed by insurance companies once the
Yeah, that's the excuse is right because of the federal.
eventually
Right, it's still illegal federally. There was that one, this auto insurance. Did you see that? The auto insurance quote or something like that, and they did a survey and found out that marijuana drivers are as safe as, and maybe even safer. Because that's the thing that people who don't use cannabis don't understand about it, is it doesn't make you drunk. It doesn't make you impaired at all in that way. It basically elevates your mood and changes the quality of your thought in an interesting direction, and modulates some of your emotion that can, you know, certainly it gives you that oh wow sensation, that effusive, uplifting, you know, appreciation of things that used to be mundane but are now fascinating. You know, I said, go, you know, if you just do it once, a little bit, and go out on a day like this to a beautiful park. What's not to like? You know, the flowers, the green, the trees, the beautiful azure sky, and you're just there, and you're like, wow, what a great planet this is.
Go to an aquarium. Beautiful.
I always say, watch my favorite comedy, What's Up, Doc? If you've never gotten high and watched the movie What's Up, Doc, do it. It's great. It's great. So damn fun. It's in San Francisco too, so I'm partial, but. So, you know, it's just the map doesn't fit the territory with regard to prohibition. What they're saying and what they're holding on to doesn't fit what science is telling us.
Prohibition was created by all kinds of industries wanting to outlaw profit, correct? Like, I mean, like the lumber industry, cotton industry, synthetic fiber industry?
Well, yeah, there's the whole Jack Herrera theory that it was mainly the plastics and the people who wanted the paper. And there may be
Mercer
some.
was a big part of it.
Yeah, he was. He was a big part of the reefer madness scare and everything. But whether that, I know Dale Geringer of NCNORML says he offers $100 for anyone who can make that absolute link with that there was, with Anslinger and that he was working to suppress it for the wood pulp industry. Because I had a hard time. I couldn't find it. I looked and looked and looked, and it's inferred, but it's really hard. What it really seems to me is the main reason was the agents who went out of work as alcohol prohibition ended. They had all these, and the government doesn't once you're in the government, you're going to, no program ever ceases to exist. Nothing, no one ever leaves government employment. It's this ever-growing behemoth. I know I'm sounding Tea Party-ish, but hey, they have some points. But it was and it was done with a zeal for it. What came out of racism, really vicious, hateful, bigoted racism against blacks and Mexicans, because it was the Mexicans brought marijuana up as they were migrant laborers who worked in the copper mines and the fields. And you can't carry a cask of liquor on your back, but you can carry a pouch of marijuana. And after they worked hard, they would smoke, and it relaxed them, eased the soreness of that. And so they had that, and they called it loco weed. The white people called it loco weed. And they didn't like, a lot of it's sort of what you see with people like Sabbath. He doesn't like marijuana. And I said, you hate marijuana. You just hate it. You have marijuana phobia. They really hate the idea of it, and they're so ignorant about what it does and how it reacts with human consciousness and culture. So there was it's that same mentality of just hating it and thinking only a lower class, marginalized person would ever stoop to use this, whereas nice people drink wine. That's what I got, because I said, well, what about people who grow? Suppose someone wants to extricate themselves from the whole black market system and grow their own marijuana. And he said, for themselves? And I said, yeah. And their friends? And he goes, like, hey, showing a vampire cross or something. And I said, like wine? We take wine to people's houses all the time. And that's the way we have to approach it, because, and I said, a far more harmful substance than marijuana. And they're young people here, and like I said, I don't think kids should use cannabis unless they're using it for a specific ailment, because it can. I had some people come and say, well, I started when I was 13, this guy's a lawyer. I'm like, well, you're an exception. I know I said, well, think what you might have become. Could have been president. Oh yeah. We forget about the tune game, but I just think that kids should be really learning a lot of stuff when they're young and be into finding out what they're into and learning as much about what they're into, because that's where they're going to make a good career for themselves. You don't want to work for someone doing something you hate. You want to get your skills and get them really good and find out what you're into. For me, it's writing and science. That's what I've always had a proclivity for, and really learn it. I was doing merit badges when I was a kid, and I never thought about getting high. I was too busy at Boy Scouts or doing youth groups or building a fort, having a dirt clod fight, wholesome things. But I think the kids shouldn't, and it's interesting, the head and neck cancer protection seems to start at 20. It doesn't seem to kick in for people who use it. It doesn't harm, but the protection, the reduced incidence seems to start at about 20. So maybe there's a sign about when, 18 to 20.
Well, to your point, parents should be more involved in their kids' lives and talking to them about it. And I know this is a complete tangent, but I, to some degree, think a lot of parents look to government and other people to raise their kids and tell them what's right and wrong, and that, to a degree, is in part why they want to maintain prohibition, because God forbid somebody sit down with their kid over dinner and have a chat with them about marijuana and why you don't really need to mess around with it when you're a kid. No, the government, that's the government's job. Let's
Well,
have them-
just say no.
Right.
And we see how well that works.
Right. Precisely.
I mean,
I think most parents are just too busy because they have to pay so much in taxes.
yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I
You
agree.
know, like, that's plain and simple.
Yeah, trying to
Parents in
maintain a
America,
household.
You know, both parents work 40, 50 hours a week. 20, 30 years ago, you know, one would stay home and one would only work 40
Yeah.
hours a week. You know, so like, I wouldn't say that it's parents think that they rely on the government. I think it's the fact that the government relies on them to work,
Burdens
to pay
them.
them. You know,
But the thing that I think, maybe can be done is, because that is a consideration that, well, my mom worked, but she was a school teacher, so she was home pretty close to when I was home. But if parents can network with other parents and like have, you know, who have the same mentality you have about keeping your kids, because that's what, I mean, our parents did that. They, you know, they knew who my friends were and who their parents were, and that they had the same values about this, and that they didn't let their kids do crazy stuff, you know, within reason. Kids do crazy stuff, but, you know, there were two neighborhoods in our town. There was ours, and no one in our neighborhood got into drugs before they went off, you know, late high school or in college. I mean, it just didn't happen. We were really like the Happy Days neighborhood or something, you know. There was another one, and they were the same socioeconomic group, but the parents always let the kids go to a park and hang out after dinner, unsupervised. All of them were smoking weed by the time they were 15. They were all into, you know, they were like little Junior Hunter S. Thompsons, looking for anything. You know, it was amazing to us, because we were like wholesome, innocent kids, and they were like, yeah, I got mescaline. Oh my God. And it's because they went and they hung out unsupervised. And, you know, you need, when you're busy, hopefully you can find someone who can help, you know, let them play together and be together, but someone who's going to keep an eye, make sure they don't run off and do stupid stuff. And you'll like it better, kids, if you wait. Norman Mailer said, I always tell my kids, the great thing about getting high is it makes thinking, I'm paraphrasing, it makes thinking interesting because it makes a lot of connections in the brain, so it gives you a lot to really think about. But the thing you want to do before you do that is to fill up your head with neat things to think about when you're high. So fill it up first and then go with it. So, anyone else?
So, can I get your book at Amazon?
I got a few here. I only have a few because I was running out.
Clint, I got 20 some with me.
You do? Oh. Aren't you thoughtful and bright?
If you need.
So yeah, I've got some. I'll sell them cheaper to you here.
Okay.
do you know of any studies on cannabis and asthma?
Yeah, actually they used to use cannabis cigarettes as a treatment for asthma,
Yeah,
but you'd want to vaporize.
vaporized.
Do not want, I mean, it can work smoking, but then you get also, you know, the gases and particulates which aggravate. So you're creating a hurdle to get over before you get the benefit. But I think vaporization, and don't, you know, you don't want to go, you probably want to take like little tiny puffs over a period of time, because it does open up the airways. That's what Tashkin said. He expected that when he did his first study of marijuana and lung function, that he would see COPD like he did with cigarettes. But he was amazed to see that it actually opens up the airways.
Thank you.
Yeah, I remember I was smoking a big fat joint at a Rolling Stones concert once, and this woman, 3 rows back, I wish you went to, I have asthma! And I'm like, well, you should inhale deeply. Wrong thing to claim, man. Bronchitis, I put it out. And it's a Rolling Stone show. What's happened to this country? So, but you know, cannabis can be used responsibly and for health, and we need the freedom to use it because I can't think of really anything that extends from prohibition that benefits society. It doesn't keep kids off it. You know, if it did, maybe you could say at least it helps. You know, but it doesn't. If anything, it's possible. I wrote an essay because teenage brain development starts from the rear, and the rear brain develops much more rapidly than the forebrain, and the rear brain is impulsive and adventure and novelty seeking, whereas the forebrain is the more controlling, thoughtful, reflective, executive function. And the rear brain in teenagers, like, and that's why they're crazy. That's why they do crazy stuff, you know? But that has a purpose. It is to drive them out of the nest, because leaving home is it's a risk-taking behavior, and it's a novelty-seeking behavior. So that's why that part of the teenage brain really develops first. And I think that having marijuana illegal and making such a big deal about it as opposed to having it normalized creates an appeal, this outlaw appeal to that novelty, risk-seeking brain that might not be there otherwise. I know Keith Stroop's daughter doesn't smoke pot. Ed Rosenthal's son doesn't smoke pot. This guy who's one of the seed innovators in Amsterdam said that, you know, his daughter and her friends kind of turn up their nose when he's getting high with his friends. Oh, look what Daddy and his old friends are getting high. You know, so
you can have like our son, and he's 23, walk in and
that was the same. That was that girl's attitude. Oh, that's gross. Yeah, no, that's fine. Grab stab. Yeah. So I think that, and to take people's kids away from these marijuana is just beyond evil. You can't tell me you're doing it for the good of the kid. There's nothing worse for a child than being ripped away from the mother, father, especially the mother though, and put in a foster home. These kids are damaged forever.
I got some good news for you. I got arrested 4 days ago with my kids with marijuana. They just wrote me a ticket. I was in South Carolina, and they confiscated my herb, but they gave me my pipe back. I'm going to court. He messed with my life. I'm gonna mess with his. You know, he gave me something illegal. But anyway, in South Carolina, they didn't arrest me.
How much?
14 grams. You know.
That's a hard loss, but
Oh yeah. It was.
but luckily it's not enough to. I mean, it wasn't over an ounce, so.
Right. In North Carolina, it's 1.5 ounces to decriminalize.
Oh, that's good. That's it's a start.
It is a start.
And that's the third number that I've heard.
Actually, it's 14 grams is a good number. It's a half an ounce, or it's a $200 fine. And after a half an ounce, it's a half an ounce to an ounce, it's a greater fine. I don't know what it is, but the guy that we had talking to us, the lawyer, he said one thing you don't want to do is ever grow up.
Yeah.
That's a federal
And he said to
offense.
keep it below 20 grams.
That's such a shame because growing cannabis is so wonderful. It's such a neat thing to do. It's a beautiful plant, and and you commune. I mean, one of the greatest marijuana experiences in the world to me is to grow a plant to its full beauty in my yard, like in containers on my deck, and then sit there with it after I've harvested it and dried it, and smoke it on the deck where I grew it using a magnifying glass to do solar bomb hits. It's happening. It's just like the whole cycle comes together because that plant is capturing sunlight to make healing crystals. I mean, you know, crystals of rich cannabinoid complex. And it really is transmuted sunlight brought in and produced. And then it's just great. You're out in the sun, got weed you've grown out there, do a hit, lying out, it's just wonderful.
Not to mention you have ultimate control of what goes into it. You know, you don't have to use pesticides, you can organic. So John out in California, very well known grower, Kyle Cushman, who grows completely veganically, and people who try his stuff, so they swear by it, that it's just beautiful and clean and tastes great, and you know, it's just things like that that you can have control over, so that you know what you're getting, you know it's this.
I was down in LA and hanging out with him. We had this party. High times with a NORML convention. High time, no, it was a NORML convention, yeah, down in LA, and I was with him. Weed and hash. He's like, here, you know how to make a snake? I'm like, yeah. Make a snake and lay it in the joint and roll it up, you know, from hash. You take a piece of hash, roll it in, lay it in the joint. Boy, we smoked a lot of marijuana that night. There were people doing dabs. I don't know if y'all know about dabs? Oh yeah. So yeah, there were people doing massive dabs. And I just thought to myself, no one's falling over, no one's throwing up, no one's fighting. You know, I walked back to my hotel from there. It was a further walk than I thought it would be. Like, I should have gotten a cab around me. But, but you know, and that's one thing they'll come after us with is the dabs. And the thing to remember about dabs is it's dangerous to produce it with butane. That's dangerous. And it's dangerous to use if there's residue, inhaling butane. But the use of concentrated cannabinoids is not dangerous. They want to pretend that THC is neurotoxic, which is a lie and a falsehood. It's neuroprotective, absolutely neuroprotective. They want to pretend that it's neurotoxic and that because it looks fiendish with, you know, you've got the flame, the torch, looks like crack or something. But the point I made is you're just in a, I mean, you have to sit down. Do not do it standing up. I don't care how experienced you are, because it can hit those receptors and then trigger a really sudden drop in blood pressure. And some people have seriously injured themselves doing that. One woman knocked out her teeth. She was standing up and one with timber. Also, if you have heart ailments, you shouldn't do dabs. It might be too much too fast if you have, you know, congestive heart issues or angina, sometimes with things like that. I just wouldn't do a dab. No doubt. It's, you know, my experience with it is, I can't drink alcohol. I don't like alcohol. I don't want anything to do with it. I hate the way it makes me feel. I'll drink like this much of a low alcohol wine a couple of times a week just because it's supposed to be good for me. I don't want anything to do with it. I can handle weed. I can hold my cannabis. And so I've done dabs. And for me, my experience is inhaling. It's almost kind of like, I get like really binocular vision, like I'm being pulled backwards or something. And I'm watching, you know, everything like telescope binocular out in front of me. And then I just get very thoughtful. I start to think about, look at the way the light is hitting the leaves of that tree. Man, photons are amazing. And then I just like get really deep into thought. So that's my experience with dabs. I don't see what's really harmful about that versus some fool who does a few shots of tequila and, you know, falls over or manhandles a woman who isn't interested in whatsoever, you know, or makes a, yeah, exactly, kills an innocent pedestrian. There's also, you got to beware when you hear bad stuff about cannabis. I remember on the Drudge Report, there is this headline, after Washington legalized, Seattle, something like, stone driver mows down man in Seattle. And I was like, whoa, I gotta see that. That's scary. Oh, I don't want this publicity. And I looked, and they had arrested this guy who had smoked maybe 2 hours before, who had hit a pedestrian. But they dropped the charges because the guy's driving along, the pedestrian steps out in an unlit area wearing dark clothes right in front of the guy. You know, there's no hope. It was no hope whatsoever. And what I want to know is, what's the toxicology report for the pedestrian? I bet there's alcohol in that guy's system, but we didn't hear about that. So, now you have to look at these studies and these reports that are horrible because they will be slanted. Study marijuana more damaging to teen brains than previously known. Marijuana causes severe damage to teen brains. Then you look at the study. They took 18 rats, juvenile rats, and injected them in the brain with synthetic cannabinoids. That's not marijuana use. It has nothing to do with real-world marijuana use. And it's a fraud. It's nothing more than dishonest, deceptive, money-grubbing research fraud.
It's a huge lie, huge conspiracy about everything.
Oh.
Now, I'm 35 years old. I run a company of 80 people. I smoke pot every day, you know, every day. I run a company perfectly fine, you know.
I sit down every day, usually have one puff or two, and go on PubMed and start reading very complex medical abstracts in all kinds of fields, trying to relate it. Like I go and I look at what pesticides do in the brain, or I go and I look at what alcohol does, or what caffeine does on the, you know, adenosine receptors, and try and correlate it all and find another way to explain why marijuana is not a threat. I read this stuff all the time. And I write about it, and I'm not impaired. But every once in a while, I want to get blasted. After I've done my work, you know what? I want to have a little extra. If I want to sit down in my yard and listen to the Grateful Dead, or Dave Brubeck, or Billie Holiday, or Ella Fitzgerald, and do 4 or 5 bong hits of something really strong with some keef on it, and just let the stress melt out of me, it's nobody's business but mine, and my spouse, and my family. And if I'm doing wrong, they're going to tell me, hey, drop the bong and go do the dishes. So, anyone else? Should we wrap up? And I actually have some posters here. If any of you want to take some, and you can put them up in your place, or you can put them up around campus and really get some agitation going. Do not put them over other people's posters on places they're not wanted. You know what I mean? If there's a place like where they're doing construction and they got plywood or something, and you want to put one up, that's cool. Or put it on your dorm room door or whatever. But the thing is, I named it this because I knew it works on changing the zeitgeist. You know, it turns it around, gateway to health. It takes that whole deceit and turns it on its ear and makes people really start to think about it. So that's why I picked that name. I went through it. Initially, the book was going to be much different. When I first heard this data, you know, I heard some of it, and I was going to do everybody should get stoned, and I was going to have a nun doing a bong hit on the front. But when I started researching it and writing it, the profundity of this amount of data, I mean, I just remember the day. I couldn't believe how much I was finding about all these different types of cancer and the different studies that I'd never known about. No one really knew about because no one had pulled it together from all over Israel, Spain, Italy, Germany, Switzerland, you know, and pulled it all together and made a coherent statement about it. And that's when I said, I just walked around my house, I was like, damn, I got a bigger responsibility. It's not going to be everybody should get stoned. I have a serious responsibility to the plant and the culture to take this very serious and to report on it, you know, with a degree of sobriety, so to speak. But, you know, to really, and so I just had this whole transformation, what I started out to do to this. And it was just an amazing moment because I was like, wow, I've got to do the plant right. You know, this is more than I thought it was. This is really a lot more.
Yeah.
And now I'm working on a second edition because there's even more. I mean, the diabetes information, the fibromyalgia, the traffic accidents, the suicides, all of this has come in since then and needs to be reported.
We're only talking about one angle, and that's medical.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I'm a firm believer humans are cleaning the animal world, the cannabis is cleaning the plant world. And together,
We are allies.
yeah.
We are allies. I mean, look what the plant does.
Ford built a car out of it, ran off.
Well, I mean, a plant that makes compounds that supplement the compounds that are our overarching health regulators. And when you ingest it, it doesn't overwhelm and short-circuit their activity. Or, you know, like if someone takes steroids, you know, it decreases the body's ability to, you know, you don't see that happening. You just see better, you know, better reactions. And if you're taking CBD, it preserves our own endocannabinoids from degenerating and keeps them vital. So,
And you were saying about CBD, that's,
cannabidiol.
yeah, but it's not, it's more abundant in certain kinds of cannabis?
Well, because we love the effects of THC, people have been breeding, selective breeding, you know, these people who say, it's not your parents' marijuana, it's sleep. You know, shut up. Just shut up. It's selective breeding. It's the same thing that turned a wolf into a dachshund, you know? Come on. It's selective breeding. People have been doing it forever. And you can't have it both ways. You can't say that we're slack underachievers who can't get anything done on one hand, and then say we've accomplished the greatest miracle in agriculture on the other hand, taking the equivalent of a garden bee and turning it into a watermelon. You know, this duplicity of our opposition is ridiculous, and we just need to keep hammering and pointing that out. You know, that, oh, it makes you an underachiever. Yeah? Guess how many states we've passed medical marijuana laws in without any help from you people, you know? And guess how we've established an industry, a self-policing industry with testing labs and inspection provisions. You know, don't tell me we're underachievers. We're the cutting edge.
Right.
Look at Willie Nelson. Look at Keith Richards. Look at Mick Jagger. Look at Bob Dylan. They're on the road. Look what happened to Judy Garland, dead at 40-something because she did pills. She should have smoked weed. She'd be doing a duet with Liza right now. So should we wrap it up? I mean,
Yeah.
I'm happy to go on.
I
Yes.
just wanted to see if you are available for a few minutes to sign books.
Yeah, that's what I'll do. I've got a few here, and my friend John. Let me know. Let's see, how many people might want one?
Yeah.
More than you got. I might have enough. Let me see how many I brought. I'm running out at home. I have 6, so.